I've previously described how to manage ordered data using simple arrays and the ArrayList class. Now I'm going to describe how to manage unordered data using a class called Collection, and I'm working in a project called Collections. The Collection class can manage both ordered and unordered data, but it's mostly used for unordered data, where each item in the collection has a value and a key. The value in a collection item can be any object, a string, a number, a boolean, or any complex object, whereas the key must be a string. In this application, I'm going to declare an instance of the collection class outside of any of the methods of the main window class. This will cause the data to persist for the lifetime of the application. I'll start with dim, and I'll create a new variable named states, and I'll data type it as collection. Then I'll instantiate it using the collection class's constructor method. There's only one version of this constructor method. It doesn't receive any arguments, and it returns an empty collection. Now I'll add code to add items to the collection, and I'll place this code inside this method named btn add click. This code will be called when the user clicks the add button. First, I'm going to make sure that the collection is empty. I'll call states.clear. And now I know that I'm starting with an empty data bucket. Next, I'll add an item to the collection using the collection class's add method. The add method takes one required argument and three optional arguments. The first required argument is the value that you want to store. It can be any object. I'm going to pass in a string of California. Then I'll pass in a second argument, which will be the key. Later on, if I know the key, I can find the value. So I'll pass in an abbreviation of CA. Now I'm going to copy this line of code and paste it in a couple of times. And I'll change the values and abbreviations for the second and third states to Oregon and Washington. So now I have three items in my collection and I'd like to display them. And I'm going to do that in a method that I've already created called outputStates. I'll put in a call to that method here. Then I'll scroll down to that method, which currently doesn't have any code. In this method, I'm going to loop through the contents of the collection and display each item's value. I'll do this using a for each loop. I've used a for each loop in previous movies. When you use a for each loop, you declare an element or a variable and optionally set its data type. I'm going to create a variable called state and say that it's a string because I know that my collection only contains strings. And then I'll say that I'm getting that item from the states collection. When I press enter, Visual Studio adds the next keyword. Now within the loop, I'll have the value state, which will be the value of the item that I'm currently iterating on. So I'll simply output the value state. Now I'll run the code and click the add button, and there's the result. I'm displaying the three items. I can also click the show button and show the items again, or I can click the clear button and clear the output. Next, I'm going to show how to write code that retrieves an item from the collection if you already know the key. I'll go to the method btn getClick. This code will be executed when the user clicks the get button. The user will type in a state abbreviation, and I'll use that value and look for it in my collection. If I find it, I'll display the item's value. So first, I'll find out what the user typed. I'll create a variable called stateID as a string, and I'll get its value from txtinput.text. txtinput is the ID or name of my text input box. Next, I'll add some conditional code, and I'll use a method of the states collection called contains. And I'll pass in the variable stateID. The contains method looks for an item by its key. If it finds it, it returns true, and if it doesn't, it returns false. So if I found the state, I'm going to output the value using this code. I'll use my output method, and I'll pass in a label of uRequested, and then I'll append the value using a method of the collection class called item. You pass in the key into the item method, and it returns the value. Then I'll add an else clause, and this will only happen if the value wasn't found, and I'll output a string of not found. I'll run that code. First, I'll click the add button to populate my data. Then I'll type in CA and click the get button and show that I got California. Then I'll type in OR and click get again and show that I got Oregon. I'll type in a value of XYZ and click Get and show that I got not found. Here's another interesting thing about the item method. The keys in the collection class are not case sensitive. So if I type in CA in lowercase and click Get, I still get back the value, even though the key was established with all uppercase. Finally, I'm going to write some code to remove items from the collection. I'll go to the method btn remove click. Now this code will be very similar to when I found an item, so I'm going to copy and paste that code. I'll start with dim state ID as string, and I'll copy that and paste it into this method. And this time, if I found the state that the user typed in, I'm going to remove it from the collection. So I'll get rid of the output command, and I'll call states.remove. Notice that there are two versions of the remove method. One that lets you look for an item by its position in the collection, an integer, and one that lets you look for it by a string-based key. That's the version I'm using. Next, I'll tell the user what happened. I'm going to clear the output with txt output.text equals a blank string. Then I'll use my output method, and I'll start with the state ID, and I'll append to that the message removed, here's what's left. And then, just as I did before, I'll call the output states method. So let's review that code. First, I find out whether the abbreviation the user typed in exists as a key in the collection. If it does, I remove it. Then I tell the user that it was removed, and then I tell them what's left in the collection. I'll run the code. I'll click the Add button. I'll type in a known key of OR and remove it. And I see that OR was removed, and I still have California and Washington. Next, I'll remove California, and I'm left with Washington. And finally, I remove Washington, and it's empty. And I can click the Add button and start over again. So that's a look at how to use the collection class to manage unordered data. Each item in the collection class can have a value of any data type, but the key is always a string. And again, you can use the collection class to manage ordered data, but I prefer to use ArrayList for that. Use ArrayList for ordered data and resizable arrays, and collection for unordered data where each item has a value and a string-based key.